Hi everyone, in this video we're going to create a histogram from a frequency table in Excel 365. So in the last video I showed you how to use the COUNTIFs function, here's what that looked like, to group a data value, a numerical data. In this case we were looking at the enrollments in various different schools in Colorado. Group those into ranges. So we had our lower and upper class limits, and then now we have computed the frequency of enrollments within each of those ranges. Taking this frequency table data, I'm going to create a histogram to display this in graphical form. So I had left this blank column here for labels. Because of the way we do these frequency calculations, we had to split up the lower and upper bounds for each of these classes. But really, in my labeling, I'm going to have this look like 0 to 499. Now I could just type in the ranges for all of these classes, but I have quite a few classes here, so I'm going to use a shortcut by using an Excel function called CONCAT. So I'm going to do equals CONCAT, C-O-N-C-A-T, parentheses, and this is short for concatenate, which basically just means stick together. So I'm going to do my concat parentheses, I'm going to click on my lower class limit, comma, and then I want to put a dash in between these, so I'm going to put in quotation marks a little dash, comma, and then click my upper class limit. When I press enter, you'll see that it has those new two numbers with a dash in the middle. I'm going to grab this formula, grabbing the lower right hand corner, drag it down, and now I have ranges for my label. You'll see that these are aligned to the left, which means that Excel is treating this as text values rather than numbers. We have ranges for each of these classes. So from here, I'm going to highlight just these class labels and the frequency values for each of those classes. And then I'm going to go to the Insert tab, and I'm going to choose this first column chart option. So you'll see this is a pretty dramatic distribution because the first class has almost all of the values in it, and then the frequencies further up are nearly 0. I need to make a few modifications to this. First of all, the default column graph is really for categorical data, not numerical data. When we create a histogram, we don't want to have gaps in between the bars because these are supposed to be continuous ranges. So to fix that, I'm going to double click on one of the bars, it doesn't matter which one, and you should see this format options show up on the right. At the bottom is gap width, and there's a little slider here. I'm going to slide this all the way down to 0, and this just removes the gaps between the bars. I also need to give this a title that describes what data we're looking at. I'm going to call this one Enrollments in Colorado Schools. And then I want to label both axes so that a reader knows what do these numbers represent. So with the graph selected, I'm going to go to the Chart Design tab, and on the left-hand side, Add Chart Element. And under Axis Titles, I have Primary Horizontal, and then I also want to do Primary Vertical, and this just turns on these titles. I can double-click on the title and change that label. So my horizontal axis, the label here should describe what are the actual data values you're looking at. In this case, these are enrollment numbers. So when I say 500 to 999, that means between 500 and 999 students. The vertical axis for any histogram should be frequency, or potentially relative frequency if you did a relative frequency table. So this is just a count. This is how many schools had an enrollment in that range. I mentioned before we have a clear outlier here. I would want to investigate that number and see if that really should belong in this data set, or if there is a school that's just really big. But I suspect this might be some kind of total that I missed in the data. For one more example, I had this other percent immunization for the MMR vaccine for those same schools. So same thing here, I can take my lower and upper class limits and create a label, equals concat lower limit, comma, in quotations, I'm going to put a little dash, comma, my upper limit. There's my label. I'm going to drag that down for all my classes. And then I can highlight both columns, go to my insert menu, insert a column graph. I'm going to double click on one of those bars, change the gap width to 0, and then give it a title and 2 axis titles. So I've given this a meaningful label, MMR immunization rates at Colorado schools and child care centers. The numbers along the horizontal axis represent the percent of students that are fully immunized, and the frequency is our vertical axis. In this case, I might make a few modifications to this. The last range, 100 to 109.99, is not really correct. This is really just 100%. Now that does create a class that's not the same width as the others, but I think it's worth looking at those schools that were exactly 100%. Alternatively, you could group that 100 into the last class since the width would still be just about 10. It kind of depends on what your purposes are. Also, because these are percentages, it might be nice to add percent values to the numbers. When I put these together for the class label, I could add a percentage after the first number and then also add a percentage after the second number. So now it's saying 0% to 9.99%, and then same with this 100, I'll add a percent there. Any modifications you make to the table should update on your ranges on the graph. So I think at this point this histogram would be clear to a reader, and from this we can see the distribution of immunization rates at all of these different schools. So most schools fall between 90 and 99.99%, but we see some tapering off to the left, and there are a few values, it's difficult to see them on the graph, but there are a few schools that have much lower percentages. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.